Assalamu alaikum. So in this video I will be speaking about my revert story. For those of you who haven't seen me on TikTok, basically I was born Jewish to a Jewish family and I converted to Islam in 2018. So I get asked a lot of how I converted to Islam, of course, as most reverts get this question. So in this video I'll get into it. So, as I mentioned, I was born to a Jewish family. I was born in Montreal, Canada, to actually a Hasidic family. So, up until I was 3 or 4 years old, up until my parents' divorce, I was raised Hasidic. And afterwards, once my parents got divorced, my mother took me and my siblings out of the Hasidic community, but we still remained Jewish, of course, and we still remained in the Jewish community. So, just a little background. My father is Ashkenazi Jewish. He is from Eastern. His family comes from Eastern Europe, and my mother is Mizrahi and Sephardic. And that means her mother was born in Morocco, and her father was born in Yemen. And my mother was actually born in occupied Palestine, or as Jewish people call it, Israel. So growing up, I always considered myself Israeli, Jewish, Moroccan, Yemeni, Ashkenazi, all of the above, but definitely was held very close to my Jewish ethnicity, and still today I do consider myself Jewish ethnically, which people sometimes have difficulty understanding, but I still consider myself as an ethnic Jew who is religiously Muslim. So to start, I guess, how it all began, it's definitely a long story. So, sorry. So I went to a Jewish school my whole life, obviously up until the end of high school. So at that point, I was super Jewish, believed in God. I always believed in God, but I believed in Judaism specifically. I believed in the Torah. I believed in the teachings of Judaism, because I had a Jewish education and I held really closely to that. Since I went to Jewish school, I was also actually a staunch Zionist. I was super pro-Israel, and yeah, I held really closely to my religion and to, I guess, what I thought was my nationality, being Israeli. So my whole high school and elementary, I considered myself Jewish, and I practiced Judaism pretty religiously. My family, although they left the Hasidic community, we still remained like modern Orthodox or conservative, so we still dressed modestly, and we kept Shabbat, we kept all the holidays, we kept fully kosher, and I mean, we still do keep fully kosher in my family's home. So yeah, it was only until I graduated high school, once I left, the Jewish community, that I started meeting, non-Jewish people, and it all started basically when people would start asking me questions about Judaism, and I would answer them, and sometimes I'd be met with challenges. They would challenge me, but this. For example, I had a woman ask me about Shabbat, and I explained to her because the Torah says that we must cease work on the seventh day, because God created the world in 6 days, and the seventh day He rested. And she was like, yeah, but how come you can't use your phone? You can't do this, you can't do that. There are a lot of rules. And it started putting a lot of doubt in me. And I remember that question specifically from that woman. I still remember who asked me that. Her name was Mary, and I worked with her at a grocery store. And anyways, I still remember that, and it really like stuck with me. And at that point, soon after, I started realizing that a lot of things that Jewish people were doing didn't make sense to me. And I was like, So I started distancing myself away from Judaism. For example, I started sneaking my phone on Shabbat, so I wasn't keeping Shabbat fully like my family was. So I'd be in my bed under my covers, because I shared a room with my sister, and I'd be on my phone. So it kind of started like that, and I started having a bit of doubt in my heart about what I was practicing, and then I basically started distancing myself from God. So I lived like that for a few months, but then at one point I was like, I feel alienated from God. I feel like I need to become closer to God. I feel like I needed to mend my relationship with God, because I was starting to feel, empty without God's presence in my life. So before going to school every day on the bus, I took a little Tehillim, which is a book of Psalms, which is written by the King David. And I started reading that, and I was like, you know what, hopefully that's going to, ignite my, my passion, my, like, in Arabic we say my iman, my faith. So I started reading that, and like it was really nice. It was a nice book, and I remember one thing in particular that I remember that kept reoccurring was how King David mentioned that he was prostrating in prayer to God. We prostrate in prayer to you, God, and it was mentioned over and over and over and over again. And that got me curious. So I was like, why don't Jews prostrate during prayer? So I googled it. I went to Chabad.org, blah blah blah. I did a lot of research. Spoke to rabbis, but like it still did not like satisfy me. All the responses I was getting were not satisfactory to me. So I was like, this is weird. So as I was doing a lot of research, like I was reading Jews prostrate during prayer, the sect of the Karaite Jews came up. So the Karaite Jews are Jews who follow strictly the Torah, and they don't follow like the Talmud and other rabbinical texts or interpretations. And it was at that point that I realized that like Judaism, like standard modern Judaism that people practice today, is called Rabbinic Judaism because it is inspired, not inspired, but a lot of the rules and a lot of the holidays and the regulations that Jews practice today are from rabbis, from rabbinical interpretations, sages basically from the past. And it was at that point that I was like, that's strange. Like, but it also explained my questions. Like, why did we do this on Passover? Why did we do this on Hanukkah? Why did we do this on Rosh Hashanah? And it answered a lot of my questions. I was like, it makes sense because they're following the interpretations of rabbis and they're not following, like strictly, they're following the word of the Torah, but these specifications, even like the Shabbat, restrictions don't come specifically, all of them from Torah. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I should look into Karaite Judaism because it made sense to me. They were following strictly the Torah. At that same time, I didn't really have any Muslim friends. I had one Muslim friend, but she wasn't, we never spoke about religion. But I knew some like Muslim people online that I would sometimes speak to. And one time I had like a whole conversation with like it wasn't a friend, it was like a Muslim online friend that I never met. Actually, I never really met in real life. But anyways, we had a discussion and we were sending each other videos about like, religion. And I saw this one video about like, debates between Muslims and Jews. And I started realizing at that point that Islam and Judaism are so similar. It was also at that point that I realized that Jews and Muslims believe in the same God, and also Christians, but that's not really relevant to the story. But up till now, to this point, I basically thought that, Muslims worshipped a different God. They worshipped Allah, which is a different God. I realized that Allah is actually just the name for God in Arabic, just like, Dieu is Arabic and French. So I was like, okay, they believe in the Torah, they believe in the Gospels, they believe in all of the Jewish prophets that, Jews believe in. And the only thing that they believe in more is the Prophet Jesus and the Prophet Muhammad as the seal of the prophets and the Quran as the word of God. So basically that's the only addition that it has to over Judaism. And I also, while I was Jewish, was like, oh yeah, Muslims stole our texts. They're just reusing, they're like copying our texts. That's really what I believed. And I realized that it wasn't copying Jewish texts. It was literally the same God. So God was continuing his message. It's the same message. And it just has, I guess, some like new information, some new tweaks. And I explained it to myself as like, it's like an update. People don't like when I use that term, but in my head, I was like, it's like an update to Judaism. So at that point, I was like, okay, it's not a whole different thing. And I decided to actually start looking to Islam. And also, when I was thinking about, when I was reading the Tehillim and I realized that, he was saying, we prostrate in prayer to God, I did actually think of Muslims. So I was like, okay, that makes sense why Muslims pray to God. Pray to God, in like the way they do with like prostration, because that's what God wanted. That's what God says. And that's how Jews were praying up until a certain point, until the rabbis came along and said, we don't pray this way anymore. And I also remember, how like Muslims pray without their shoes on, and I was like, that makes sense because a mosque is a holy ground. When you pray when you speak to God, you're speaking to someone so holy, so you have to respect them and take off your shoes. And I thought of, the time when Moses spoke to God and in the burning fire, the Snebo el Ba'esh. I'm not sure exactly what it's called in English, but it's like the fire, and God said, please take off your shoes to speak to me, to address me. And this was holy ground, so he had to take off his shoes. And I was like, that makes sense. And it was like little things like this. At this point, I still was not like actually considering being Muslim, but it was little things like that that kept being added into, like, I kept realizing that I was like, okay, Islam makes sense, this makes sense. Until one point I was like, you know what, I'll read the Quran. And I started reading the Quran, and the Quran made sense. And I was like, like, there's nothing wrong with it, it's perfect. But at that point, I still wasn't like fully, convinced like I'm going to change my religion, because I felt like the thing that was holding me back most was, honestly, I felt like I'd be abandoning all of my cultures, all of my traditions, everything that I once believed in would be like completely gone, just because, like, I'm changing my religion, and my religion was a fundamental part of me, of who I was. And I had a really hard time, drifting, like separating myself from that, accepting Islam. But at some point I realized that actually accepting Islam and being Muslim and practicing Islam would actually make me a better Jew. And I wasn't separating myself from Judaism. It was the same God. I was still being, it was still the same religion as the God of Judaism. So I came to realize that at some point. And it was just over time, like I said, many little things that I learned about Islam that made sense to me, even the modesty, and, how the modesty of, like, how Muslims dress. It made sense to me, and I'm like, my whole life, modesty made sense to me because I was raised Jewish, and it just all made sense to me. And I can't exactly remember what was the last drop that made me Muslim, but I do remember when I decided basically to become Muslim. It was Ramadan, it was 2017, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do Ramadan just want to see what it's like, so I was like, I'll do it. And as a Jew, I had fasted for like Yom Kippur, so it was like 25 hours for Yom Kippur, so I'm like, yeah, I can do this. And I was able to do this, and I was like, you know what, I want to fully immerse myself in it, so I'm gonna like pray too. So subhanallah, I actually learned to pray like really quickly. And I remember that I think it's in the Quran, or it says that, God made this language easy for you to understand. And I was like, subhanallah, I was able to learn to pray so quick, and I never had even spoken Arabic. All I knew was like shukran and salam, like, honestly. So I started praying, and I remember one time I was in bed, I was like, okay, how do you become Muslim? And it said, you just need to repeat this word. It was the shahada, the sentence. So I sat on my bed, I was like, la ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. And I said it, and I'm like, am I Muslim now? Like, I feel the same. So technically, I was Muslim since 2017, but I still at that point wasn't like fully like immersed in Islam. Like, my heart wasn't fully there, so I don't necessarily consider myself fully Muslim at that point. And I still had some things to work on, the abstain from certain things that Muslim must abstain from. But yeah, I was still starting to, think about Islam. I went to some Jum'ah prayers. And then it wasn't until later, it was in January, I met this girl online, and actually it was funny. I was like posting a lot of stuff about Israel, like a lot of pro-Israel stuff, and she like was sent over by one of her other friends who like sent her over to talk to me and be like, why are you like supporting this, that? And anyways, we started talking, and then I told her, like, we started hanging out too. And then at one point, I told her, I'm like, you know what, I want to just convert to Islam. Like, I want to do it. I want to fully do it. So it was in January 26, 2018 that I actually converted to Islam. I took my shahada, and that's when I consider myself fully Muslim. And yeah, that was pretty much it, how I went from being Jewish to being Muslim. I hope this video wasn't too long, and I have like different things I can add, but I don't want to make this video too long. So if you have any questions, you can always ask me more questions, and I will address these topics as best as I can. Thank you so much, and ma salama.